Hello, everyone. Welcome to a triple feature of Avian Ecology interns. Uh, I'm Sahas Barwe. I'm the program director for Avian Ecology here at Archwood Biological Station. Hello, everyone online on the interwebs. So we're going to start with Esteban Mendez. So I'm really excited to introduce Esteban to you. Esteban got a BA in biology from the College of New Jersey in May 2023. He's a biologist with varied interests. Before coming to Archbold, he worked on snake habitat choice in New Jersey, on arthropod communities and their microhabitat preferences as an REU at the University of New Mexico. Esteban is an exceptional naturalist, and during his time at Archbold, he has put together quite an amazing collection of photographs and videos, not just scrub jays, but mammals, insects, plants, and other critters. He has an Instagram account dedicated to natural history that I urge you to follow. I'm sure many of you will learn something new about the biodiversity that surrounds us. Esteban followed his curiosity of Florida scrub jay nests for his project. He studied nest microhabitat choice, building on the works of previous interns like Brian Camerano and Keith Martins. Without further ado, here's Esteban.
All right, thank you, Sahas, for that amazing introduction. All right, so now you guys know I'm Esteban Mendez, and today I'm going to be telling you about my experience looking at nest placement in the Florida scrub jay. Click. Oh, well, that worked. So first of all, why are we looking at nests? So both eggs and nestlings are important developmental stages in birds that happen entirely within the nest, and the state at which birds leave the nest in can be a good predictor of their survival later in life. Also, nests are the site of the highest amount of mortality in birds. In Florida scrub jays, nest predation is over 50% due to predators like snakes, small mammalian mesopredators, and birds of prey. Though camera trap studies and habitat overlap suggest snakes are the most impactful predators in Florida scrub jays. And nest construction and care requires complex behaviors and coordination between breeders that take a lot of energy and can put them at risk as they might defend their nest like this from predators. Oh, accidentally. All right. So now that we know why we're looking at nests, why are we looking at Florida scrub jays, or what are we looking at here? Florida scrub jays are cooperatively breeding corvids. They live in family groups that hold territories. They're non-migratory. They're endemic to Florida scrub, and they're threatened. They're pretty good models for looking at nesting behaviors because they will re-nest multiple times in a single breeding season. As you can see here, each one of those dots is a nest made by the same group of birds in one breeding season. So they gave us 5 nests to work with. And since they're using the same territory year after year, they're familiar with the landscape and anecdotally have some preferences and as to site. And here you can see each one of these different dots, the color represents the year, and you can see they're kind of clustered around specific areas. So why are we looking at nest placement in particular? Nest placement in a lot of previous research has been found to have an important impact on reproductive output, and in corvids specifically, it is known to be related to predation risk. So Florida scrub jay nest placement also varies a lot. So can anyone see the nest in this picture? Give you a second to look at it. This is what we do a lot. There's the nest right there. You can see it's in this live sand pine, not too high off the ground, and it's pretty well concealed. What about this nest? A little bit harder just because of the picture, but there it is right there. And so this one is in a dead sand pine. It's pretty high up, and it doesn't look like it, but it's not really well concealed or blocked from view. And so there's a lot of variation in scrub jay nest placement. So looking at the dynamics of nest placement, previous research has focused a lot on cavity nesters and how the nest sites that they pick are limited through the nest placement characteristics they have. But more recently, in open cup nesters, we have found that they're also restricted to sites that meet certain nest placement parameters, though these parameters are not really fully understood in birds in general, and they vary from species to species and within species, as we saw. And it's important to investigate this in Florida scrub jays because it can really help us understand their nesting dynamics. So there has been some previous research in nest placement in Florida scrub jays. So looking at it in a larger habitat scale, we know that they prefer 2 of the scrub oak species we have, being Quercus geminata and Quercus myrtifolia. We also know that they prefer to nest in plants that are taller than the surrounding vegetation and have open areas nearby, like this nest right here in the red circle. Looking at scrub jay nest placement within a plant, there are a lot of research has been done specifically with height. Like Sahas mentioned, Brian Camareno in 2022 looked at nest height after predation events, and he found that nest height after predation event was higher than before. And this is interesting because nesting is known to reduce predation in birds. And then following this up, Kate Marthins a year later looked at nest height, but instead looked at just seasonal influence. And she found that as the season went on, nest height increased. And this is interesting because predation pressure also increases with the season. She also postulated that there might be some kind of seasonal cue for this increase. Another study by Bowman and Wolfenden looked at that with higher nests, there was more amount of smilax around the nests. And this is interesting because it could increase concealment or how visible the nest is, how not visible the nest is. And so this combined with the cue suggested by Kate Martin and Brian Camareno also thinking that concealment is something that'd be interesting to include in future analysis. That is what I decided to include this time around, concealment. So looking at what we know about concealment in a lot of studies has been found to reduce predation, but the results are kind of mixed. Some studies have actually found that higher concealment has downsides when it comes to predation risk, but others have just found there isn't really a link at all. And concealment is also not stable throughout the season. As the season goes on, where plants leaf out and the available concealment out in the habitat should be higher. So given that there's kind of an ambiguous relationship between concealment and nest success, as well as that concealment isn't stable throughout the season, I decided to look at if seasonal dynamics of nest concealment and placement influence nest success, and what were those dynamics. I did this through asking 3 questions. Does concealment vary over the breeding season, which I predicted the nests built later in the season would be more concealed, since concealment should be beneficial for nests, and since there's more concealment later in the season, they will maximize that. I also asked if concealment is associated with higher nest success, and I said that it would be just based off previous research, and this is to confirm what is the relationship in Florida scrub jays. And then what is the concealment relate? How does it relate to nest height? And I predicted that it would remain pretty equal as nests got higher, and that's because both nest height and concealment are beneficial for reducing predation. And so as concealment in places higher up in a plant got better, they will increase their height while also kind of optimizing the amount of concealment. So I use Archbold's long-term demography tract to study this, and we have a hunt for over 360 scrub jays in 70 plus territories. And every year we record nest location, as well as monitor nest progress, as well as some other basic nest metrics. And this year we found 167 nests, of which I used 160. You can see them all on this map here. It took a lot of work to find those. I had several metrics that I measured for concealment. I had 3 measurements. The first is lateral cover. And so lateral cover, I measured by standing a meter back from the edge of a nest plant, putting my head at the level of the nest and visually estimating how much of the nest is being blocked by the plant. And I did this from the 4 cardinal directions and then averaged it. Similarly, I looked at canopy cover, which is actually looking at how much sky is blocked by the plant. And I measured this by putting my phone above the nest facing up, taking a picture. Again, more into that later. And then I also looked at nest depth, which is basically the distance from the outside of the nest plant to the nest outer wall, as you can see here. I also looked at nest height, the shrub species it was in, whether it was alive or dead, and nest timing using Julian date, which is just a way to quantify the time of the year. So I collected all my measurements during incubation period of the nests in order for the concealment measurements to be relevant to what they were when the breeders actually selected the nest site. And because of this and the fact that Florida scrub jays are a threatened species, I had to be really careful not to stress them out. And so I did this by reducing the amount of time I was at the nest to be well below 5 minutes, and using audio to make my time more efficient while recording my data, watching out for predators while I was at the nest, and saving my more invasive measurements like taking the picture for last. But higher nests were a little weird because I had to climb a ladder in order to sample these, and so that took a long time. And so I just waited until these nests fledged and it wouldn't harm the nest at all to measure them. And so all in all, I put in over 65 hours of fieldwork just for this project, on top of often 5-hour plus days of trudging through Florida scrub, getting torn up by the plants in the hot, humid Florida heat, and also getting eluded and scolded, and at times even dive bombed by Florida scrub jays. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, I had to do a little more work with my canopy cover photos, and so I used a package in R called Cover R to basically turn it from a picture into a percent of how much of the side was blocked. Some images I had to do a little manual processing if there were weird things with the lighting. But after that, I had all my data and I ran it through linear mixed models where I used territory as a random variable. Okay, so what did I actually find? Addressing my first question, whether concealment varied over the breeding season, specifically looking at canopy cover, I predicted there'd be a positive relationship, so an increase, but I found there's no significant relationship between the two over the course of the season. I found a similar thing with the nest depth. There was no significant relationship, even though I thought there would be a positive relationship. And with canopy cover, I actually found a very slight but significant downward negative relationship between the canopy cover and time of the season. Now, looking at whether the amount of concealment was related to nest success. In this violin plot on the left here, we have successful nests, and on the right, we have unsuccessful nests, and we're comparing their amount of lateral cover. And I found that there was no significant influence of the lateral cover on whether it was successful or not, even though I thought there would be. I thought that this would be higher in successful nests. And I also found a similar thing with canopy cover, where there was no significant relationship between canopy cover and whether it was successful or not. And also the same thing for mean depth. So my final question, whether concealment related to nest height. I found actually a downward trend, but it was not significant for lateral cover. It was a non-significant relationship, so it remained constant throughout the season. And then for canopy cover, I found that, again, there was a constant relationship, which is what I did predict to clarify. Predicted it would remain constant with nest height, increases in nest height. And for mean depth, as the nest height got higher, there was also a slight negative downward trend, but it was also not significant. So kind of summarizing, whether the season influenced the amount of concealment, we did not find there was a relationship for lateral cover or depth, and actually there was a negative relationship for canopy cover. And for whether concealment influenced nest success, we didn't find that any of them had anything to do with whether the nest was successful or not. And then looking to see if higher nests were equally concealed, we did find that concealment stayed stable as nests got higher. So just kind of just summarizing up what we found. So let's look into these results a little bit more. This kind of shows that concealment, despite plant phenology and the seasonal change in nest height, is pretty conserved in the scrub jay's nesting preferences. And this is pretty interesting, but we also don't really know what its relationship is with nest success, why we're not seeing the clear relationship that the literature says we would. So some reasons that this might be is that I was essentially sampling concealment from a meter square around the nest plant. And the effects of concealment might not show up unless you're looking from further away, or if you're looking at a habitat and its vegetation structure at a larger scale in general. And this is supported by the potential prey site hypothesis, which basically says the more dense vegetation and potential nesting sites you have near the nest is better for preventing nest predation, because predators will have to search more area in order to find your nest. And this is especially relevant because snakes, which are the main predators to remind you, are very olfactory and random search oriented with their predation. And so visual concealment might not prevent them from finding your nest as much. It still might reduce predation from visual predators like birds of prey. So it is possible that the nests out there are reducing predation from birds of prey if they do have higher concealment. But then why are there nests with lower concealment and we don't see that there's a downside? This could be because maybe they're using behavior to offset the risks of these lower concealment nests, such as being more vigilant or more defensive. And these could have effects that aren't just reflected in whether the nest was successful or not. From another perspective entirely, maybe there just is an optimal concealment range, and it's not that just more concealment is better. And I can explain that using the concealment visibility trade-off. And so here we have a nest with low concealment and one with high concealment. The nest with lower concealment from the outside, if you were a predator, you can definitely see that nest a lot better than the one with high concealment. But if you look from the perspective of a bird sitting on the nest, if you have low concealment, you have a very large unrestricted field of view to see approaching predators. And also, if you do get surprised by a predator, you can escape pretty easily. Versus if you have a lot of concealment, it's harder to see predators approaching. And if you do get surprised, there might be more obstacles in the way of your escape. And so this is why there might be a more optimal concealment range. And also, it could affect the adult survival rather than the nestling survival. It also just might not have anything to do with nest predation at all. It could be more of a microclimate effect. And this could be through reducing sun exposure and water loss with higher concealment. And this could affect the nestling mass, which is also an important metric, but isn't necessarily 100% related to whether the nest was successful or not. But it could also just have a more complex relationship with microclimate, specifically if we consider nest orientation. Less concealment in specific directions can have benefits for the microclimate, like having less concealment facing where the sun rises early in the season, or having less concealment facing where prevailing winds are coming from later in the season. So regardless of all that, I think that the nesting dynamics of Florida scrub jays are still not fully understood, and that's kind of what it is in the field in general. But even though they're not fully understood, and there's a lot of variation when comparing these results to results in other species, it's still really informative because there's a lot out there. And also, it's just really informative for us here because Florida scrub jays are a threatened species and they require habitat management. So anything we can do to better understand their nesting preferences can help us inform our management practices, like burning. And some future directions I would like to see this research go is comparing the actual selected concealment with the available concealment in the entire habitat just to nail down what specifically the preferences are. And then also examining, back to the things I mentioned in my discussion, examining whether at a larger scale the nest habitat patch influences concealment, and also whether the concealment has a relationship with microclimate and the parental behavior. Also, I would like to look and see if there's a relationship between nest concealment and nest morphology, which is something that Charlotte's going to be talking about after me. And then also whether nest concealment has a relationship to within pair variation in nests placement, or between pair variation in nest placement that is dependent on their experience. And so with that, I would like to thank Sahas, Tori, Sarah, all the Bird Lab interns, Cass, Charlotte, Soph, all the interns here who have gotten to know, and all the Florida scrub jays, amazing organisms that have made my days very entertaining in the scrub. Thank you. I have it. Oh, you want to just use this? There it is. Oh, and first,
yeah, that was a great talk. I feel your pain of all that data that you have and no significant results.
yeah, it's a process to accept it.
Yeah. What I was wondering, so you have this from the perspective of the nestling success, which makes a lot of sense, and you started touching on it at the end there. But I'm wondering about like if this is an adult thing and helps with the adults, and maybe these are all, rather than like these are suboptimal or optimal, it's all part of one strategy. But like maybe say if you have more family group members, you can go into more concealed areas or vice versa or something like that. I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that was also something I had wanted to look at, kind of like the group and social dynamics to see if that influenced it all. But I had to make sure I wasn't biting off more than I can chew because this analysis took a long time and I have a lot of other things I want to look at. But that is also something I think would be pretty important to see if there's a relationship there.
So there's one online. Sterling asks, says, great talk. Do scrub jays have a preference for which tree species they nest in at different times of the year? I know many species will drop their leaves briefly during the year. Maybe this could affect their behavior.
Yeah, so it wasn't a main part of my analysis, but I did have as I mentioned, the shrub species as a factor I was considering. And I did my different analysis, depending on what I was focusing on looking at, kind of showed some different relationships between the different tree species and what I was looking at. But I did see that pines in some cases tended to be a little bit later, but that wasn't really the main thing I was focusing on, so I wouldn't put 100% weight into that. And there's also earlier in the season, I think we had a few more nest in palmettos versus we didn't. That was just anecdotal, but I don't remember seeing any palmetto nests that were really late in the season.
I think in the interest of time, let's keep moving along. Thank you so much, Esteban.